Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Entitled To's latest webinar. We're here today to talk to you about ways that you might want to support your universal credit participants back into work as they navigate the new labour market that we see ourselves in due to the pandemic. My name is Wendy, I'm from Entitled To, and you'll be hearing from Phil Gornick, one of our directors this morning, who should also be on the screen with his camera. Just before we do get going properly, I would like to do a hands up audio test, if that's okay. So in your panel on your right hand side, you will see a little hands up symbol. If some of you can just click that for me to check that the sound is fine. Lovely, great, seeing some hands come up there. We do have some audio problems sometimes, which is why I put that little information on the screen, but if you're having audio problems, you won't be able to hear me give you the description. So Phil's going to control the slides for us this morning. So if you're okay just to move on to the next slide, please, Phil. Great, just wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction to Entitled To. Some of you are our clients, so welcome. You will have spoken to us and heard from us before, but some of you may not have heard of Entitled To. We have been around since 2000, and we've built a range of calculators to help people navigate the very complex social security system that we have in the UK. And some of them are aimed at advisors like yourself, and some of them are aimed at the public. But ultimately, we want to help people understand what benefits they're entitled to and feel empowered to boost their incomes and help boost the circumstances of their families. We are independent, accurate and reliable, and our goal, as we put there, is to transform your welfare services to help you help your clients in whatever way we can. Next slide, please, Phil. This is just a range of our products. We're going to give you some demonstrations this morning of a couple of them, and we will talk a little bit more detail later on about the ones that may be more relevant to your sector. But this is just another little bit of information about us and how we aim to help you. Next slide, please. This is what we're going to cover in today's webinar. So we will look a little bit at what the COVID-19 support schemes that have been in place, such as furlough and the self-employment income support scheme for self-employed participants, and when they are coming to an end and what the impact of that might be for people. We will do a little bit of an introduction to universal credit because we don't know the level of your level of background knowledge of the people on the call this morning. So we thought we would just take a little step back and just do a little bit of an introduction to what universal credit is so that we're all working from the same page. We will then look at how universal credit affects different groups of people, but with a focus on self-employed people, because the rules are a little bit more complicated for self-employed people, and many of your participants may be looking at starting new businesses and wanting to navigate the benefit system and doing that at the same time. So we want to aid you in the process of helping those people if they want to become self-employed or they already are self-employed. And then, as I mentioned, we will giving some demonstrations of how our products can help you and help your clients. And then, of course, answering any questions. Questions can come at any point through the morning, so please type them again in your panel on your right-hand side. You will see a little question section. Please just type in there at any point. I will be Phil's question master, so if I feel the question is relevant at the point that he's talking about something, I will interject and ask him that question, or we might park some of them to the end and come back if we have a little time at the end. We'll see how much time we have. We are due to finish by midday. We'll have you on your way for lunchtime, and hopefully we can provide lots of useful information for you this morning. I think before we move to Phil, we're just going to do a little bit of a poll, just to dig a little bit into the benefits knowledge that you might have, just so that we know what kind of level to talk this morning. If I just launch that poll. Okay, so the options should be up on the screen for you. Just need to select one of those options, and this is just so that we know what kind of details to go into this morning. We might skip over some of the background to universal credit if you tell us that you know everything there is to know about the benefit system. So great, we've had quite a few come in there. We'll just wait another couple of seconds. Interesting. Okay, we're at about 85% completed, so I think I will close that. And let's show that to you now so that you all know who's on the call. And let me just minimize that panel for my own panels covering the screen. So nobody professes to know everything there is to know, which is probably fair. The system is constantly changing, and there is a lot to know. There is a lot of detail, quite a lot. So 2/5 of us are quite a lot, and 2/5 a little bit still learning, and a couple nothing at all. So because we've got a high percentage of that a little bit still learning, we will just do a little bit of background then, I think, into universal credit. But Phil, you use that information to guide you into how much detail you might want to go into. So let me just try and close that poll. Great, we should be back to the slides, and if you are happy to go ahead, please move on, Phil. Thank you.
I will do that. Thank you so much for that, Wendy, and thank you for all coming this morning. Yeah, that's quite a range of knowledge, so I will probably skip the more difficult bits. It's only 1 or 2 slides, but I'm going to start with a bit of background about COVID. We got to mention COVID, but it is coming to an end. I should say it hasn't quite come to an end for my colleague Karen, who should have been with us, but she's looking after a child who is self-isolating because someone at their school had COVID. However, in terms of the government support schemes, obviously we've had massive intervention for the past 15 months, but that is all winding down, and it's basically all winding down by the end of September. So the eviction ban, it's not a social security intervention, but it is important in social policy. That's already started to unwind. So from the 31st of May, the amount of notice for an eviction has already gone down from 6 months to 4 months, and it goes down back to its standard period of 2 months from the 31st of July. Then the self-employment income support scheme. We have said an awful lot about what this scheme is over the past 15 months and written blogs on it and things like that, but the last tranche, so there have been 5 tranches. The last one is in July, and then that scheme will come to an end. So in terms of what you will be doing with your clients going forward, it's unlikely to be very important. It's only important if you're seeing clients kind of next month or the month after. The minimum income floor, I am going to come on to explain what the minimum income floor in universal credit is. It's been suspended, but it comes back in on the end of July. It doesn't come back in one fell swoop where everyone is affected, but it starts to be reintroduced, and it's a very important aspect of the way universal credit affects self-employed people. Which is why we've got a section on self-employed people, because it's incredibly important to realise that the minimum income floor makes the universal credit system very different for self-employed people than compared to the tax credit system. The £20 uplift to universal credit is meant to be abolished at the end of September, and of all the things here, this is the one I am most doubtful will actually go. I'm fairly confident all the other things will happen, assuming we don't get a massive 3rd wave, or is it a 4th wave? The £20 uplift to universal credit is due to stop at the end of September, which we think in fact means that assessment periods from October onwards will be at the lower rate. Obviously that means taking away money from people who are currently receiving universal credit, and taking away for some people it's going to be 1/5 of their income that you're going to be taking away. It's extremely controversial. Parliament may not be sitting in September, so there may not be an opportunity to debate it, but I think there is likely to be an awful lot in the news over the next few months about the £20 uplift. However, the government's stated plan is for it to end at the end of September. And then finally, the job retention scheme, or furlough. yes, from next month, the percentage contribution from the government starts reducing. So it goes down from 80% to 70% in July, and then it reduces again in August and September, and then it does end at the end of September. Okay, so the impact on benefit claims and on claimants is unknown. In particular, obviously the £20 uplift will have a massive impact on people who are claiming it currently, but a really big unknown here is what the effect on the labour market is going to be. So I'm just going to show you a couple of slides now, which are from a really useful National Audit Office report, which came out a couple of weeks ago into employment support. And this is one of the graphs, and what it's showing on the bars, it's showing the number of people who are furloughed. So obviously in April 2020, there were 8.5 million employees furloughed. The graph only goes up to February. It had gone down to about 5 million in February, but in between, it had really dipped. So in October 2020, when the government, you may remember, started unwinding furlough, or said they were going to unwind furlough, and then as we had the second lockdown, if I recall correctly, in November, they reintroduced furlough. But the line shows redundancies, and as you can see, there's a clear relationship between furlough and redundancies. So when furlough was, the number of people on furlough was reduced, redundancies peaked, and as furlough came back up, the number of redundancies went down. So our expectation is that as furlough reduces, and those bars are going to be heading towards zero in October, or are meant to be heading towards zero in October, our expectation is that redundancies will rise. We can't be certain, but that's what the previous data suggests. So that's one impact on overall numbers in the labour market and redundancies. But I think the other thing to really appreciate is the uneven impact of the pandemic. So just as being forced to stay at home, if you live in a nice house with a big garden, may not be too uncomfortable, but if you live in a crowded house where there's 6 of you in a 2-bedroom flat, it's not much fun. We've got a really uneven impact in terms of the labour market, where essentially more disadvantaged groups have suffered the worst. So that's young people and BMEs have suffered the worst in terms of the increase in unemployment rate. So 16 to 24-year-olds, it's gone up by 3% during the pandemic. Non-white ethnic groups, it's gone up by 3.5%. Disabled, it's gone up by 1.5%, but the average increase in unemployment rate is only 1.3%. So it's very uneven. And I think the next graph, which isn't from the NAO, it's from the House of Commons, illustrates that again. So it shows that for prime age, 25 to 34, 35 to 49, the impact on employment has been pretty small, but there's been a really big impact for 18 to 24-year-olds and also a decent impact for older workers. Now, older workers, it's probably because they've withdrawn from the labour market. With 18 to 24-year-olds, those are people who would be moving into jobs, but the vacancies have not been available. So broadly speaking, if you're in a job, you've been protected through the government schemes such as furlough, but if you are entering the labour market or in a more marginal job at the edge of the labour market, it's been much more difficult to move into jobs, and so there's been larger falls in employment. Okay, so I hope that's drawn a picture of the labour market effect of the pandemic. I'm going to move on now to talking about benefits specifically. The background is then we expect benefit claims to increase, but we don't know how much, but we expect those claims to be concentrated in younger age groups and ethnic minorities from the data so far. Okay, I'm going to give a quick overview of universal credit. As Wendy said, if you've got any questions, do just put them in the chat and Wendy will interrupt me. Right, what is universal credit? I've been doing this for a little while now, since it came in 2013. Universal credit replaces 6 existing benefits and tax credits. Now, these are now known as legacy benefits, and they are 3 out-of-work benefits: income support, income-based job seekers allowance. You can still make a new claim for the contribution-based version. Income-related employment and support allowance. Again, the contribution-based version still exists. The 2 tax credits, child tax credits and working tax credit, and housing benefit. So with those 6 benefits, if you are already on them, you can stay on them, and I'll come on to that in a moment, but there are no new claims to those benefits. So the really important thing to understand about universal credit is that it includes housing costs. And because it includes housing costs, it means that you're much more likely to be getting it in work as well as out of work. Okay, so it's the way to think about it is it's a big sum. So what universal credit does is it adds up your needs, which are to do with your own personal needs, the needs of your children if you have any, and your rent and any costs associated with disability. It comes up with the kind of total need, and then it subtracts from it other income. And obviously, principally other income is earnings, and it does so on a taper. So the result is the higher your needs, i.e. children, rent, the more likely you are to also claim universal credit in work. And in practice, we know the majority of claimants are in work. Okay, so types of universal credit claim. You've got the kind of obvious way of getting onto universal credit, which is you previously weren't claiming benefits and you were in work, you lose your job, and then you start a new claim. And for quite a long time now, new claims for people who haven't been on previous benefit are always to universal credit. But for people who are on legacy benefits, so those 6 benefits I've mentioned already, they also move on to universal credit through a process called natural migration. So that's if they have a change of circumstance, which means that they have to leave one of their existing benefits, they have to make a claim to universal credit instead. So a really good example is if you're claiming housing benefit in one local authority area and you move home to a new local authority area, even if you haven't moved into work or had children or anything else has changed, because you've moved to a new local authority area, each housing benefit claim is administered by that local authority. It would be a new claim. Can't make any new claims for housing benefit, therefore you have to claim universal credit. It is a complex area, and I will show you on the next slide how we try to help people with that. But I'll just mention the third way of going on, which is barely started, which is called managed migration. So that's people who are on a legacy benefit, and DWP write to them and say, we will be moving you on to universal credit on date X, and on date X, they stop receiving their legacy benefit and their universal credit claim starts. That isn't really happening at the moment. There's a pilot in Harrogate, but it's more or less been suspended during the pandemic. There are still about 3 million people, 3 million households on legacy benefits, and some of them will come across to universal credit through natural migration, but the ones who don't have a change of circumstance will come across through managed migration. And originally, I think the managed migration was meant to end, I think, in 2017, i.e. 4 years ago, and I think the expectation now is that it will end, I believe, in 2026. But I've slightly given up trying to remember these dates because they keep going backwards. At some point, everyone will be on universal credit is the idea. Okay, we've got this question mark at the bottom.
Phil, we have had one question. I don't know, this might be the relevant point to mention it. Someone's asked, is there any way of someone moving back to their legacy benefits if they did move to universal credit last year without knowing they were making the right choice?
No is the answer to that. It's a very good question. So it operates by what's called the lobster pot principle, i.e. once they've got you, they keep you. You can't get out. So even if you have mistakenly moved to universal credit, i.e. you could have continued to claim tax credits and possibly you'll be better off under tax credits. If you've made the move, you can't get out. There's no recourse to switch back. Yeah, occasionally you see stories on RightsNet about people doing it, but I certainly don't know of any way of doing it. It's certainly not the principle that they're operating on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to come on to say a little bit about, and I'll try to show you examples of people who are better off and worse off on universal credit relative to legacy benefits. So when universal credit was designed, as well as joining up these benefits, the rates were changed. So the change in those rates has been good news for some types of people, but it's been bad news for others. Broadly speaking, low earning tenants are going to be better off on universal credit than on legacy benefits, but there are going to be some exceptions, and the exceptions are things like if you have a disabled child, the rate of universal credit for a disabled child is about half the rate in child tax credit for a disabled child. I should say if it's the child is severely disabled on the highest rate of personal independence, disability living allowance, I should say, for children, then the rates in universal credit and child tax credit are identical. But if you've got a child who's disabled but not severely disabled, child tax credit pays more. So there are a few other examples like that. So it really is only possible to tell by looking at a case and checking their individual circumstances about whether they're better off on universal credit or not. Overall, the statistics are that the majority of people are better off, but that doesn't tell you about individuals. And of course, it's complicated because of that £20 uplift. So as you can see on this slide, we do tell people if they're better off on universal credit, but of course, we're telling them including that £20 a week uplift. So as you can see from this example, we're working out that this person is £20.26 a week better off under universal credit, but really that actually means universal credit and legacy benefits pay the same if you take away that £20 a week uplift. So giving advice to people is very difficult at the moment because it's unclear whether you should be including that extra £20 a week or not. We do, because we are literally comparing this is what we calculate for universal credit, this is what we calculate for legacy, and then we try to warn them that it's going to be withdrawn at the end of 2021. But of course, as well as the financial aspects, there's also the way that universal credit is administered and people's view about it. It has more conditionality than tax credits. It also has other rules in terms of being paid out monthly, as you'll know, and having a 5-week wait before you get it. I think it's also true to say that it's got a poor reputation. So whether people are better off or not, they may not want to move on to universal credit, but this change of circumstance, natural migration, means that they might have to. So we've got a link there called What Changes Might Trigger a Move to Universal Credit, and the next slide will show you what they can be. So we're trying to look at different kinds of changes of circumstance and tell people whether it means they have to move on to universal credit or whether they are able to stay on legacy benefits. As I said, the idea is that if it makes a new claim, such as a change in local authority, you do have to move, but if it's not a new claim, you don't necessarily have to move. So the biggest example of that is people who are on child tax credit. If you've got an existing child tax credit claim and you move into work, you can still then receive working tax credit, because the tax credit system is not two individual benefits. It's two elements, if you like, of one application for tax credits. So this guide gives individual advice depending on whether you're having a change of employment, or having a child, or a child leaving home, or being a carer, etc. The word of warning at the top is, of course, this is all quite complicated. Okay, and I've already said that I'll skip on the £20 a week boost ends at the end of September. So all our comparisons at the moment, if you like, are £20 too generous to universal credit if you believe that the government will withdraw it at the end of September. Okay, I'm just going to move on to a different aspect of universal credit now, which is the work allowance. So if you don't have children or are not disabled, the system works through assessing your earnings and taking off 63% of them is counted against your universal credit, or the taper rate is 63%, and that starts from 0. But if you have children, or if you have a disability, the first £293 a month if you are claiming housing costs, if you rent, or the first £515 a month if you don't rent, is ignored. So obviously, if you do have children, or if you do have a disability, the universal credit that you're going to get in work is going to be more, because the first 293 or 515 per month is ignored. And in terms of the better off amounts, that's clearly going to mean that the gap between in-work and out-of-work benefits is bigger for those people who can get a work allowance. And then I also want to talk about assessment periods. So we talk about universal credit as a monthly benefit, which might seem to be, June, July, August, but really that's a simplification. The way it works is, if you say claimed at the start of the pandemic on the 23rd of March, if I remember, 2020, when the first lockdown occurred, that means you will always have your universal credit assessed from the 23rd of one month to the 22nd of the next month. And if you are weekly paid, that will mean there'll be a systematic variation in the amount of universal credit that you get, because in some of those assessment periods there will be 5 weekly payments, and in some there will be 4, because sometimes the 23rd of the month to the 22nd is going to have 5 paydays, and sometimes it's going to have 4. So we have a calendar, which I'm showing you on this slide, which works out when those weekly wage payments will fall and works out the universal credit that will apply. So obviously, when you've got 5 wage payments, you've got a higher level of earnings, so you've got a lower level of universal credit, and those are the lines shown in red here. In the past, I would also have done an example for people who are monthly paid. If you are monthly paid on, say, for instance, the last Friday of the month, there would be months where you would have, because the last Friday of the month varies, there were some people where it was possible to have 2 payments in one month and no payments in the next month. The government have now dealt with that issue for monthly paid people. So they always ensure if you're monthly paid, there's only 1 payment in each assessment period, but they haven't done anything about it for weekly paid people. So you're bound to have this variation shown in this slide. I'll also just point out that if you look at November and December, you'll see that the amounts go down. So the kind of full amount, the 4-week amount, goes down from 634 a month to 547 a month, and the 5-week amount goes down from 557 to 470. So that's the taking away of the £20 uplift that is due to happen. As I said, it's at the end of September. What we actually think that means is for assessment periods occurring after October. we're waiting for more clarification from the government. Okay. And just to say that these assessment periods are also very important in terms of self-employed people. So if you are self-employed, universal credit works on a cash in, cash out basis, i.e. it's all the income that you actually receive in your bank account that month against all the money that goes out of your bank account that month. So in terms of smoothing your income, which is the simplest way to think about managing your universal credit, if you smooth your income, you will tend to make best use of your work allowance and avoid other problems in the system. You need to know when your assessment period is so that you can make sure that you are, as best as you can, keep smoothing your income between those assessment periods. And this example illustrates the case. The person's assessment period in the example of them claiming on the 23rd of March 2020 at the start of the pandemic, their assessment period today would be from the 23rd of June until the 22nd of July. Okay, I'm going to go on and say a little bit more about self-employed universal credit in just a moment. I will check with Wendy if there's any other questions.
There were a couple. Thought I'd just bring my face up so people can see me talking rather than just noises coming out the machine. Someone said they missed what you mentioned about children and the work allowance. So if we could just pop back to that slide, and if you could just recap on the allowance. What is the allowance for someone with children if they start work?
So if you've got a child, or indeed if you're disabled, if you start work, you will get at a minimum the first £293 a month of earnings ignored. That 293 applies if you are a renter, you pay or have housing costs. But if you don't have any housing costs, so you don't rent, so you might be an owner-occupier, you would have the first £515 a month, would not reduce your universal credit at all.
I actually got that question wrong. Apologies, Louisa. It was people who don't have children.
If you don't have children, it's all, if you don't have children, you don't have a disability, from the very first pound, your universal credit is reduced at the rate of 63%. So the taper applies from the first pound that you earn. So that's that group at the bottom.
Wonderful, thank you. Hopefully that answers your question, Louisa. Sorry for getting that wrong. And someone else has said, when should weekly paid claimants submit their earnings, on payday or before?
They don't. If you're an employee, you don't submit your earnings. The earnings are assessed automatically through HMRC and the PAYE system. So if you're the notion of submitting a form only applies to self-employed people who have to go to their UC journal. If you are self-employed, it should happen automatically through PAYE. But in any event, it's not when you report it, it's when it goes into your bank account is the key. It's a key concept. It's when it's paid. So there's no possibility of manipulating it.
Wonderful, thank you. And final question for the moment is, the question just simply says, what about mortgages? So I'm assuming that means work allowance for mortgage, people with a mortgage.
No, so mortgages, you can't anymore claim for housing costs for a mortgage. It was once the case, but it's now moved to a loan system. So it's called, I think it's still called income support mortgage. No, it's changed its name. It's called support for mortgage interest, but it's a loan and it sits outside the housing cost system. So sorry, this is probably a bit of a relic. Housing costs are only rent. There isn't help within UC for mortgage costs anymore. It's all done through this SMI loan.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you very much. I will skip forward and I will probably try and increase my speed a little bit. So we have covered this in a different webinar. So if you want more detailed on self-employed, get in touch, or I think it's on our YouTube channel. So we've gone into an awful lot more detail, but I wanted to touch on it here because it's so important to realise that with employees, really the majority of people, not all of them by any means, but the majority will be better off under universal credit. It's worth checking if they're not. But once you're onto the system, you've kind of, the getting on is probably the difficult bit. But once you're onto it, there's a reasonable chance that you will be better off financially under universal credit. With self-employed people, you have to bring in this idea of this minimum income floor. So in tax credits, you declared how many hours you were working, and if you were declared that you were working more than 16 or 24 or 30 hours, depending on whether you had children or not, you then just declared your income. And if you declared that you had net profits of £100 a month, it said £100 a month, and if you said you had £2,000 a month, it was 2,000. So it's just like the tax system. It was self-direct declaration, and it was annual. With universal credit, the government says that we expect you to be earning the national living wage, and we expect you to work a certain number of hours, which is normally 35 hours at that wage. And that if you don't earn that amount, it doesn't matter, we're still going to assume that you do have earnings of that amount. So the effect of the minimum income floor is for people who aren't earning at the minimum income floor or above, their universal credit will be cut, even though as if they had those earnings. So as I said, it's based on the number of hours times the national living wage, and then an amount is taken off for when it says notional tax and I. It's because when you're self-employed, you can actually choose when you pay the tax. So it converts, it works out the amount of tax you should pay that month if you were going to pay monthly. So let me show you on the next slide what that means in terms of numbers. So you first work out this individual earnings threshold, which is the number of hours you're expected to work. It's typically 35. If you've got young children, it can be less. Or if you can persuade your work coach that you have special circumstances, you may be able to get it reduced in your claimant commitment. But the standard is 35, and then that means with the minimum wage amounts shown there, you get the numbers for the individual earnings threshold. I will take someone who's over 23, so they're on the minimum wage of £8.91, and at 35 hours a week, that means they are expected to earn £1,350 a month, but you've got to knock off a bit for tax and national insurance. So once you've done that, it brings down their minimum income floor to £1,227 a month. So if they have that amount in net profit, they won't be penalised in any way, but if they earn less than that, they're effectively penalised by the government assuming that 1,227 as their earnings. The system for couples is deeply complicated, but it takes into account both their earnings, is what I'd say. I won't try to explain it anymore. And just briefly to explain why that exists. So, as I said, under the tax credit system, it was a self-declaration system, and DWP believed in the past that that was rather open to fraud. So that's a primary reason for doing it, is to make sure that there is an under-declaration of earnings. But the DWP also say that by having a minimum income floor, it encourages people to earn more. But kind of more precisely, if you are running a business where you can't earn the living wage, DWP want you to switch to being an employee. They don't want, in their terms, they are subsidising your activity by helping you to stay self-employed, and you should be moving away from self-employment and becoming an employee if you do not make the minimum income floor. Okay, so just to say that there is a grace period that apply for the minimum income floor. So that is either the first 12 months if you move to declare yourself self-employed during your universal credit claim, or if you start a universal credit claim and you were already self-employed, it's the first 12 months of that universal credit claim. So the minimum income floor doesn't apply during those grace periods, but it is also suspended until the end of July. The governor said that when it comes back in, they will individually notify people. So we think that will mean that they will write to each self-employed universal credit claimant and say the minimum income floor will apply to you from date X. And it is possible that what they'll do is they will ignore the pandemic. So for instance, if you started claiming universal credit at the beginning of the pandemic, it might be that they'll set the clock starting on the 1st of August. But that's a complete guess. I was hoping that we would have more information from DWP before now. We haven't got it. It's very important, but you'll have to watch this space. Okay. I'm just going to say a couple of other things about self-employed. As well as the minimum income floor, you've also got the fact that you have to report your earnings every month rather than tax credits, which was every year. So every month you have to declare the income coming in and the money going out. And as I said, by month, I mean assessment period. I don't mean June, July, August. And you'll see a little thing there, which is the income from the self-employment income support scheme counts towards your universal credit. And that affects something called the surplus earnings rules. Now, I'm not going to say a great deal about these because they're very complicated, but essentially what these are trying to do is to smooth out income. And it can mean that if you've got a self-employed claimant who earns a great deal in 1 or 2 months so that their universal credit falls to 0. So for instance, someone who might work festivals during the summer when they're back on, they might not be on universal credit for say June, July and August, but their earnings will be then carried forward into September, potentially October, in order to smooth out their earnings a bit, and that will have the effect of reducing their universal credit. Okay, when the self-employment income support scheme goes away, this is less likely to be true, but obviously the existence of SEISS has meant that people who are self-employed have been getting big lump sums. In this case, we've taken someone who's getting the maximum SEISS, 7,500. That's 2,500 for each of the 3 months in those SEISS payments. And that wipes out their universal credit in June. But as you can see from the surplus earnings column, 4,000 of that 7,500 is carried forward into July. And then a little bit is carried forward into August and has the effect of reducing but not eliminating their universal credit in August. You're probably moderately unlikely to come across a case with surplus earnings, because the reason it's really come up is because of this self-employment support scheme. But I did want you to know that it does exist for universal credit recipients who are in fact, it's not just self-employed, sorry, it's self-employed and people who are employees who have a high income in 1 month. Okay. Before I go on to how we can help, I think I'm going to pass back to you, Wendy, to run a poll, and I'll see if there's any questions as well.
Yes, just to give you a little bit of a break in your voice as well there. Well, slide's gone slightly wonky there. What's happened? Let me just move this box out of the way and launch this poll. So, as Phil says, before we go into doing a demonstration of our products, we just wondered if you've seen this panel before. So it's on a couple of our different calculators. If I just launch that poll, do you remember seeing our Better Off in Work panel on any of our tools? It might be the public site, you might already be a client of Entitledto, and you've used it on, it might look slightly differently if you're one of the client calculators actually, or no, you've not used it before. And if you have used it both on the public and the client, you could select both of those if you wanted to. Okay, interesting. We've got about 60% of the votes in so far, so I'll just leave that a little bit longer. These results are quite interesting, Phil. I'm not sure they're going to help us decide in which to do. I will just close them now. Got 77% in, so I think that will do. And if I just share the results, we're pretty much 50-50 of people who have used it before or not used it before. So you may have to factor that into your little demonstration. Just to give Phil a little bit more of a chance to rest his voice, I will just remind people, do ask questions. We realise the information is so thorough. I have had a couple of questions typed into the box, Phil, where I was just about to read them out, but then you answered the question before I had chance to pose it to you. So Phil is giving such a lot of detailed information today. We realise he might be covering lots of your questions, which is great if he is. But whether you think it's small or medium or large, whatever question you would like to ask, now is your chance to ask this benefits expert that question you've always been wanting to find out. It may be whether something our tools can do specifically, it may be more general, but please do ask. It's why we're here today, while we're live. We've had a couple of people who've messaged saying that they couldn't hear the audio, and someone's rightly said to me, it's not quite the same if you have the video and slides later, which will be sent out to you. A few people have asked this as well. The slides will be sent out to you, hopefully this afternoon or tomorrow, and the recording of the video, so you can watch that back and share that with your colleagues. But you won't have a chance to ask any questions, so please use that opportunity now. Someone's just put something in actually, but I can't see it on the screen. Let's see. Well, here's the question. Does the amount of universal credit depend on someone's age?
The universal credit has got lower amounts for people under 25. So 25 to 66. After 66, you go on to pension credit. The allowance rates are all the same, but under 25, there's a different rate. And I think there's a different rate under 21 as well, but definitely between 25 and 66, it's the same rate.
Wonderful, thank you. One more here about, just on the screen. One more about self-employment. Under self-employment, if a business is making a loss, does this mean they are not getting help?
No, if you're making a loss, you'd get the maximum amount of UC, so you wouldn't have anything deducted from your needs. What the minimum income floor does is it says you can't carry on doing that forever. So you can do that during your grace period and continue to get universal credit, but the minimum income floor would kick in at the end of your grace period, and it would say it doesn't matter if you're making a loss or just a little, we will assume that you're earning at the minimum income floor level.
Wonderful. Kerry, we're actually, so Kerry asked that question, and we're actually developing something we're calling the myth what if at the moment. It's going through our test development at the moment, so we don't have a demonstration of it for you this morning, but that will, when the myth comes back into play for self-employed people, we will have a feature on our calculator that helps people work out if they are affected by the minimum income floor. So that will help you and your clients to see what the impact of that might be. And we've had some more questions. Would you like to move on to the demo, Phil, and then we will come back to these couple of questions at the end?
Yeah. Okay. Let me do that, and I will just quickly show you here the different products that we have. So we're a bit short of time, so I'm really going to demonstrate the Better Off calculator, which is the tool that we have, which is focused on the employment support sector and on working out one particular change of circumstance, which is the change of circumstance where you are moving from unemployment or low earnings into employment, and it's saying, what is your income now? What is your income in work, and what's the difference between the two? And that is our main product for the employment support sector. But just to say that we do also have a much more general advisor calculator, which probably focuses more on income maximisation but also it allows you to look at all types of changes in the circumstance, like moving house or having a child or splitting up or getting together. And then we also have a budget tool, which you can link to from the calculator. And if I get a chance, I will show that to you. It allows you to obviously put in the amount that you're spending as well as your income. And then we have an affordability calculator that joins together benefits and budgeting. So I'll just show you those quickly on the next slides and then come back to this. So the budget tool is the kind of thing that you might imagine, a pretty graph, a breakdown of all your expenditure. And this is just a simple 2-page tool. The affordability calculator is trying to do something a lot more complicated. It's trying to have 2 tabs. One is this increased earnings panel we've talked about. How much better off would you be in work? But then you can also look at the budget, and you can, for instance, put in any work-related costs. So the better off calculator is about your income out of work and your income in work. The affordability calculator is about your budget out of work compared to your budget in work. Okay, if I just go back here and click on this link, it will, with luck, take me to a results page of the Better Off calculator. So what I've done is I have tried, for reasons of speed, I have missed out the journey where I've entered details, and I've gone straight to a results page, and I'm trying to show someone who, as you can see, they haven't got children. We're not asking any children questions. They're not disabled. It's just someone who is renting for £150 a week, I've assumed, and they're getting universal credit, which covers their rent of £150 plus £94 a week at the moment for them, including that £20 uplift. And they also get help with their council tax through a system called council tax support. So we start off by summarising their current income, but the main action is here in this how much better off would you be in work panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to name this one as the first one, and I'm just going to say, we'll call it the minimum wage for 30 hours, okay, which is what it defaults to. And I will click on calculate. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare their out of work income with their in work income. So as you can see from this table, their current income is universal credit of 244 plus some council tax, with total benefits and total income of 257. They move into work. Their gross earnings will be 267,891 times 30. There'll be a bit of tax to pay, so their net earnings will be lower. They'll lose help with council tax, but they'll still get £86 a week of universal credit. And that means that overall, they will be £81 a week better off in work than they were out of work. Okay, and that's because they're still getting £86 a week of universal credit. They're not losing all their universal credit when they move into work. So what you can do when you're logged in and on our calculators for clients is, if I click on new better off calculation here, you could use it for looking at particular jobs. So I will say here that I'm going to look at a job at McDonald's, and I will say that the job at McDonald's is for 35 hours a week, and I'll say that it's paying £10 an hour, and then I can click on calculate, and it will do exactly the same thing, which is it'll look at that job and it will say, okay, your gross earnings are 350, you're paying a bit more tax, so your net earnings are 308. You've still got residual universal credit of £50 a week. So that net earnings of 308 plus the £50 a week from universal credit means that your income in work is 359, which is a bit over £100 a week more than you currently get. And you could build up a series of calculations like this. So if you were looking at, say, Burger King, just get rid of that, BK, and if Burger King were paying £11 an hour, but they could only provide 25 hours. Let's see what that does. It'll work out again. It's £83 a week better off because you're still getting some universal credit there, but obviously the gross earnings are lower. And then you can use this drop down to move between these different examples. So the way to use the Better Off calculator, if you can, is to use this to log in and to use this new Better Off calculation button. And then that gives you this drop down, which means you can compare different jobs. Okay. So I should also say that when you do a Better Off calculation, you can download a PDF, and the PDF has got details, that table there, and you can send that to the client. We have got these other ways of looking at it. We've got a graph and we've got a slider, but I must admit, I don't really like those. The one that I think is clearest is this table here, which clearly shows you you're losing this amount, you're gaining this amount, and this is your net position. Okay, I did have a number of other examples, but I'm going to skip over them because I want to show you just this other tool which we have at the bottom, which is our budget tool. So if you click on this link, it's going to launch our budget tool. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring across the data that we've entered into the calculator. So this person has got rent of £150 a week, which is what I entered in for them. That's come across and it's expressed monthly here. Again, the council tax amount has come across. And if I go down here, you can see that my current means tested benefits, which are universal credit of £1,000 a month, have also come across. So we've partly pre-filled the calculator, but then I can the budgeting section, but then you can enter other things. So for instance, you could enter utilities. We've got standard amounts in here. So standard amounts are optional and you can choose them. These ones have all been filled in, but you can choose to make them blank. And you can also choose which fields are compulsory or not. So I shall enter £40 a week for food, and I am going to, for the sake of brevity, miss out the other ones which are not compulsory. I just need to enter a salary here of 0. Oh, it's come across as 0. So if I press continue, it's just a simple 2-page tool. It just compares your income and your outgoings, and it has a traffic light system. So this person has a credit balance of £70 a month, and obviously if they had a negative balance, it would be red, and if it was about even, it would be orange. Displays some text, and then as I showed you earlier, it shows you the breakdown of where the spending is. And it can also provide some messages about things to do next. So it's just a simple 2-page budget tool. Okay, Wendy, I think I'm very near the end of my time, so I'm going to skip the affordability calculator, but I will invite anyone who wants to see it to get in touch, and we're happy to give it a demonstration. I will hand back to you just to see if there's anything we can slip in, any questions in the last couple of minutes.
We have had quite a few, and do you just want to move on to the next slide, Phil, so that people can see our contact details? Maybe there are a couple of more actually. Whiz through those, so yeah, that you can see, get in touch with us if you've got any more questions. we've had a few, and I don't think we're going to have time to cover all of these. We've had 4 or 5. I might just, one of them is about sort of regional and some variances. So one is, does the calculator take into account Scottish systems, water, council tax, Scottish rates, etc.?
So the council, we look up the council tax amounts for each area, and that would be including water in Scotland, I think, but certainly we include Scottish benefits like the Scottish child payment. So yeah, all Scottish benefits are included, and we will continue to do that as the Scottish social security system evolves.
Yeah, that's going to change quite a lot over the next few years, isn't it? So we will definitely monitor all of that. We're constantly tweaking and evolving the calculator. So anyone, another reason to get in touch with us, if you've used it and you have some feedback, we're always looking for feedback for people who are using it with real life examples for people. We test everything all the time before it gets released and constantly when things are live in the tools, but you guys are actually using it out in real life circumstances. So please send us questions, send us feedback. We're always happy to receive them. I think my time says we are on 12 o'clock, and we are having a couple of people leave us and say they've got to go to other meetings. So I'm really sorry that we didn't manage to answer some of your questions. We will be having other webinars. So if you've either come to us today, I think through URSA or the ISP network, so we will promote through them again, or get in touch with us and we'll try and let you know. And thank you very much. Thank you for Phil. I hope your voice is fine. Go and enjoy a cup of tea, and I will leave you there. I hope you all have wonderful afternoons. Take care. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.